Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into something absolutely crucial for any academic, the very foundation of research. Think about building a house. You wouldn't just grab a hammer and start randomly swinging without a blueprint, right? Well, building a PhD thesis is exactly the same thing. It requires laying down a solid philosophical foundation long before you ever pick up your analytical tools. We're going to unpack exactly why that is and how you can map out your own academic blueprint.
So let's kick things off by busting a pretty massive myth. A lot of PhD candidates actually believe that their research journey starts by sitting down, staring at a blank screen, and just deciding, am I going to use qualitative methods or quantitative methods? But actually, scratch that, it's completely backward. Your journey absolutely does not begin there.
To figure out why, we're grounding today's explainer in some fantastic academic coursework from Professor Fiznik Marina over at the Faculty of Business, University Haji Zeka. Drawing directly from this framework, we're going to see how proper methodology is really constructed. It's not just a bunch of random choices, but a deeply connected philosophical system.
Here's our roadmap for the day. First, the foundation of research. Second, paradigm before method. Third, mapping reality and knowledge. Fourth, the positivist approach. And finally, defending your design.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the foundation of research, which is way more than just theory.
You know, philosophy often gets a bad rap as just some abstract buzzword, right? But it's actually the operational engine of your whole project. The source material hits the nail on the head here. In business and economics, the phenomena we study are incredibly complex and dynamic. They're pushed and pulled by institutional, social, and technological factors. That means your choice of research philosophy is never neutral. It dictates your entire scientific stance. It guides the questions you ask and literally places boundaries around how you're allowed to interpret your results. Without it, your work is just a fragmented pile of data, numbers and interviews that don't actually prove anything cohesive.
Moving on to Section 2, Paradigm Before Method, or the top-down approach.
This brings us to a huge realization about the sequence of your study. Choosing your method, it's not just a technical checklist, it's a direct consequence of a top-down flow. You always start with your overarching philosophy, which shapes your paradigm, which builds your design, which finally spits out your method. You can't skip steps here. A quantitative survey or a qualitative interview isn't neutral. They carry the actual DNA of the paradigm you chose back in Step 2.
Okay, Section 3, Mapping Reality and Knowledge. Time to tackle the big concepts.
If we're going to understand paradigms, we have to map out reality itself. First up is ontology. Now, don't let the jargon scare you off. Ontology is essentially just how you define what is actually real in the world you're studying. For instance, if you're studying consumer trust, ontology asks, is trust a measurable, objective thing out there in the world, or is it purely a subjective feeling created entirely inside the minds of consumers? You literally have to decide, is reality an objective thing, like a physical globe you can just look at and measure, or is it a subjective construct built kind of like blocks inside the human mind? You've got to plant your flag firmly on one side of this conceptual map before you can do anything else.
And once you've nailed down what's real, you're going to need epistemology. This simply means understanding how we generate valid knowledge about that reality. Let's go back to that consumer trust example. If trust is an objective fact, epistemology asks, do we best measure it with a massive standardized survey? But if it's a fluid human construct, do we best interpret it through long-form one-on-one interviews?
This naturally splits our theory of knowledge into three main branches: positivism, interpretivism, and pragmatism. These are basically the primary lenses through which you'll view your entire PhD.
Let's put these side by side so they're crystal clear. Positivism is all about explaining and testing causal relationships. It wants to know what causes what. Interpretivism flips the script entirely. It focuses on understanding complex human decision-making and all those messy human feelings behind the data. And pragmatism? Well, it cares a lot less about philosophical purity and more about just getting the job done. It lets you combine methods to solve concrete, real-world problems.
Which brings us to Section 4, the positivist approach, definitely the dominant paradigm in this field.
If you're in economics or business research, this is the traditional heavy hitter for sure. It fundamentally assumes reality is totally independent of you, the researcher. It views scientific research as this highly systematic process of empirical verification, really focusing on generalization and replicability. Now, interestingly, the source notes that post-positivism refines this slightly by admitting our scientific knowledge might be provisional and probabilistic, but it still absolutely insists the world is measurable.
So what does that actually look like in practice? Well, if you look at your proposal and you're asking measurable, causal questions like, what impact does financial policy X have on metric Y? Then congratulations, you are operating firmly within a positivist paradigm. It gives you immense analytical clarity, but just remember its boundary. It's strictly limited to phenomena you can actually translate into hard numbers.
Finally, let's wrap things up with Section 5, Defending Your Design, the ultimate PhD challenge.
How does all this abstract stuff actually help you on Defense Day? Well, your committee is looking for a perfectly connected web. You cannot pick your analytical tools without first clarifying your ontological and epistemological positioning. Why? Because if your tools don't match your underlying philosophy, the whole shebang falls apart. Your thesis lacks structural coherence. Philosophy is literally the glue holding your theory and methodology together.
If you master these core steps laid out in the coursework, comparing the paradigms, linking them to your design, and applying them to real cases, you get that structural coherence you absolutely need for a doctoral defense. It proves to the committee you aren't just blindly crunching numbers, but that you genuinely understand the nature of the knowledge you're creating. And that means way fewer painful questions for you at the podium.
So, I'm going to leave you with a bit of a challenge today, right from the heart of the source material. Look at your own research proposal. Don't just look at the methods. Ask yourself, which paradigm is really pulling the strings behind the scenes? And more importantly, if someone challenged you on it right now, what specific elements of your design actually prove that choice? Getting crystal clear on that is the true secret to a bulletproof thesis. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. And hey, happy researching!